This is the UX Ladder, Conversations Beyond Pixels, a deep dive into product cultures, inclusion, and the untold stories that shape experiences and trends.
Hi, Miriam. I'm good. It's Friday afternoon, so I'm good. Nice to see you
It
too.
is Friday afternoon. I totally feel you. Well, first, I just want to kick off by saying I know this has been a weird off week for many of us, given the election result and just given all the fields that are coming out from, that result. And so I want to take a moment to sort of just acknowledge that and take a moment to center. How are you doing in this moment, and how has this week been for you given that?
I think in this moment I'm good. Earlier this week, I was talking to somebody else about this earlier. I felt distracted on Tuesday and Wednesday, but I think after those couple of days now, I'm in a state of acceptance and moving ahead however I can.
I really appreciate that note of moving ahead however you can. It also comes with certain privilege from where we all live at, right? But it's just, yeah, I've been really distracted and trying to focus on what I need to, which is why it's really nice to pause and have this kind of a conversation, which just feels just so different from everything we've been reading and all of that. So thank you for making space in this weird off week. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. I'm going to start by putting you on the spot. You know me enough to know that I do enjoy doing that. So I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction and then we'll get into some questions. Sound good?
Yes.
All right. So everyone, I'm so excited to introduce Priscilla Hung, a UX designer at FreeWorld, where you focus on designing impactful solutions to combat generational poverty and reduce recidivism. Priscilla, you draw from extensive experience, which I find really, really unique. Just in my career pathway and just in the journey of doing these, I've spoken to a lot of folks, but you're the first person who has such diverse experience in that you have extensive experience as an occupational therapist, merging over 8 years of expertise in healthcare with user-centered design. And it's this unique combination, really, I would think, allows you to go super deep into user needs and habits and behaviors and apply those insights, right, to the design process because you're looking at it with such a different lens. And where you've been as an occupational therapist, I think just not only in touch with people's emotions, but their physical sense of self, which I find super interesting. But that said, since 2020, you've continuously built your knowledge and skills of design. I mean, it's how you and I came together. But you also work really hard to continuously improve in graphic design, web development, and I recognize you as someone who thinks very deeply about their craft and challenge yourself continuously to get better and better. Your career has, had a few different paths from there as well, where it's included leading fitness-focused design projects at, and tell me if I'm pronouncing this right, Umi or Yumi? How do you pronounce this? Yumi. Okay, and promoting senior well-being at Affinity Rehab. You've also contributed your design expertise to Breathing.ai, OKB Hope Foundation, and UX Rescue. And this, to me, and I think to everyone, really demonstrate your passion for not just collaborative problem solving, but really focusing in actual focus on why we do this work for humans and being very mission driven. Beyond that, though, I was really interested as I was sort of doing all of my digging and understanding and reflecting back to other conversations we've had over roughly a year at this point. You're really open to chatting, participating in user research, volunteering, activism, brainstorming, and something that I found extra interesting, which is beta testing new products. So I want to start today by asking, what about beta testing new products is so interesting to you?
Oh, beta testing new products. I think it's interesting because of the work that I have done at Yumi and Breathing AI and my other projects prior to FreeWorld. It's in those projects I always felt like, oh, it would be so great to get some feedback on on how we've done so far. And it's also like an exciting time when you can help somebody else who's trying to make something uh something something good, I guess, for lack of a better word, and also a time where I feel like my feedback can make a big impact.
Totally. Yeah, 100%. And you look at everything with such a open mind that I'm sure the products that you volunteer to beta test, they really benefit from that. So appreciate that. So let's talk a little bit more about your personal journey. Now, you have a Master of Science in Occupational Therapy at Indiana University. Fun fact, I also went to IUPUI, where I went to the design school, but looks like our lives did cross over there. From this experience, what stands out most to you, and how has it influenced your understanding of people's needs and behaviors when it comes to the UX world?
How has it influenced me was the first question,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
I think a big way that it's influenced me is that I've gotten to encounter and interact with a lot of different people. Most of the work that I did in occupational therapy was with older adults. So, in that regard, a lot of different people, but they were all age 70 plus. But it's still, I think, the chance to interact on a pretty like close and personal level with individuals at times when they're honestly in sort of vulnerable positions because they're recovering from an illness or injury. I think that's allowed me to have like an understanding and appreciation and some level of skill in just interacting with people and appreciating how they experience the world.
That's really interesting. And so, do you think this has impacted your design process and really augments it in a sense?
I do think so. Um, I think that it's led me to have a big focus in in empathizing during my design
Mm.
process whenever possible, right? We don't always have the luxury of
Yeah,
going through the entire design process in perfect order. But
yeah.
I really, I really value understanding the audience that I'm designing for, and I think if I guess thinking on it now, I feel much happier in the projects where I've had the opportunity to do that compared to the ones
Mm.
where I haven't.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about that. So you have all of this experience, right? And you had, I believe, a Bachelor of Science in biology, and then you did occupational therapy. When and how did your design journey begin?
My design journey began while I was an occupational therapist during during COVID times, I believe. So I think in a way not that unusual. It was probably peak COVID times, and we were sitting at home more than usual, thinking about different things. Um, feeling, I guess I was feeling inspired about changing the world, but also maybe frustrated about the current state of things.
Yeah,
Um,
feel that.
yeah, so I, with the extra time and the extra little bit of motivation, I thought, hey, I'm not able to make the difference that I really want to with occupational therapy. So let's try something else. At the time, my interest was in like climate change and sustainability. So that's what
Yeah.
initially prompted me to pursue something else.
I am always in awe of people who not only think of something but then go after it. I'm very much the sort of person like I'm going to do all these things and I do none of it.
Mhm.
Um, and so, how did you get started? Like, what made you think about design versus like I don't know, a career in advocacy or in of climate change or that sort of thing? Like, how did you pick design?
Mm-hmm. Well, it wasn't a direct path. You mentioned web development and graphic design earlier,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
so that's how it started. I don't remember exactly why anymore, but my first idea was, "Hey, I'll try." Oh, I remember now. I wanted to buy I was shopping for soap, bar soap, and I wanted to find an option that was sustainable, but, like,
Yeah.
not just on the surface, but actually, um and it was I maybe fell down a rabbit hole, but it was a very long, arduous experience, and that
Really?
made me frustrated. I I think I locked myself at shopping for soap for like 4 hours, but I had that time at the time,
I
and
mean,
yeah.
I think we all did.
Yeah. So,
Oh,
I thought, I'm gonna make a website that's better, or I wanna try to make a website that's better. There has to be a better way. And so I tried. I realized, I'm not gonna start a company, so I guess I'll try to learn to build it myself. And I started the web development boot camp at that point, which at the end of, I realized I don't want to bang my head against a wall trying to solve problems all day. And
hmm.
there was a lesson in the boot camp about UX design that had piqued my interest,
Oh,
but I still didn't go there right away. Then I, for some reason, pursued the graphic design class and then finally landed on UX design.
I think all of that is so interesting because it really, one thing does inform the other. So I really appreciate you drawing that timeline out for me because I feel like, yes, now these worlds are so separate, right? But like back when I went to school, you just did design, right? And UX came as a field separate in this nature much later. So I'm assuming, of course, that web design and graphic design does that experience still did, um, still, so you still draw from that experience.
Mhm.
Um, if you're open to it, I'd love to talk about the influence of your career path, right? Because you chose a specific path and then moved away from it. Did your family have any influence on what you chose and at what point?
I not not perhaps in the way that you're asking. Um, my family's my family has always been very, like, flexible and open in terms of the path that I want to pursue, in terms of, like, in the sense of, like, I was never forced to be a doctor or a lawyer,
Mm. Yeah,
anything
that's
like that.
you are absolutely right. That's exactly what I was wondering, right? Like, did they, or also like, hey, you have a good path, you have an advanced degree. What are you doing now? Like, did they were they open to it? Because if so, that's pretty awesome. And it's, in my experience at least, that was very unusual for me to for my family to be on board, or frankly, to even understand what I'm doing.
Mhm. I my mom was actually on board with it. I I think she didn't I told her why, and I think in a way she wasn't particularly excited about the last one of the OT jobs that I had,
Mm,
was in home health, and she had concerns about my safety going
right.
as a female alone, showing up to other people's doorsteps
Yeah.
was her concern. So she was supportive, and I think she still doesn't really know what I do now, but I because her and my dad were both not self-proclaimed not very good at school, they were always just glad if my brothers and I were doing well in school and, we're doing okay for ourselves.
That's awesome. And it's also just really good to hear because I feel like one of the reasons I like to ask these questions is that it's so easy to also sort of stereotype, right? And for me, the stereotype is absolutely true, but in one sense, it was more true for, say, my older siblings. I'm the youngest of three, than for me, right? Because by the time they came to me, they were like, okay, whatever, but really, are you really going to do this? And so I'm glad that it's not just a blanket statement that people can make. Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit because I want to talk about where you are now, which is FreeWorld, an organization that's really fascinating to me. In the year or so that we've been talking, I've really learned a lot about your work there, but also just read a lot about them so that I can be more in tune with what you're doing. And and so just for folks out there who might be listening and all of that, just to reiterate, Free World is all about breaking the cycle of generational poverty, where they help formerly incarcerated individuals build successful, sustainable lives through well-paying jobs. And as a designer over there, you are at the heart of creating user-centered solutions that support this really important mission. So Priscilla, the question I have for you is, what's been the most rewarding as well as the most challenging part of designing for an organization like FreeWorld that's focused on tackling systemic barriers?
That's a good question. I think the most rewarding part, honestly, I get very energized by talking to our users. I would say that's a
Hmm,
very rewarding part of my work. I I hear stories about designers who don't get to talk to their users or don't have very many touch points with them. So I'm always grateful for that I do have that. And then um, I'm also lucky at FreeWorld to have uh, exposure to the feedback of our users because we have a Slack channel where they can talk to each other, and they
that's
often
awesome.
post feedback or
Yeah,
celebrations or challenges that they're facing. So I
yeah.
think it's rewarding to design something, have it implemented, and then see it see it impacting our users almost directly.
Yeah, that's so gratifying, right? Like that's the word I was searching for. Because I think one, especially as designers, we, very nerd sense, we like to see our work out in the world, and we want to see how it's impacting people. But especially for the work that you do, where it really is a systemic barrier, right? Like where incarcerated individuals have this, it's so hard to reintegrate back into society. And so, what are some of the things that you have learned through these interviews that you do, something that might have stuck with you or changed the way you think, whether about work or life or just your philosophies in general?
hmm Uh, I've learned a lot about reintegrating into society. Um,
Mm,
it's it I would have thought that I had an okay understanding of it from my occupational therapy background and having had a little bit of exposure to occupational therapy and community reintegration after being incarcerated. But it's opened up a whole new world talking to people who have actually lived the experience. Like, I think it's painted a much clearer picture. I think in general we might think we know what it's like if somebody tells us, "Oh, it was really rough when I first left prison. I the world was kind of foreign to me. I didn't have money. I was out of touch with my family, whatever." And we can all try to relate and say, "Oh, that sounds really hard." But I've had the chance to talk to our users now, and they give me like more specific stories about how that impacts their lives or how that means, struggling with homelessness or leaving and maybe continuing to struggle with addiction. And it's I also see how that impacts them as they are participating in our program. They're like actively trying to make things better, but still being bogged down by all of these challenges.
How do you balance all of the stuff that you're learning? Because I'm sure it feels amazing that, okay, I'm hearing these things and I can do something about it. But how do you sort of balance the emotional impact of that? Because that's a lot of load to hold, right? Because you're sitting here designing amazing software that's making a difference in so many people's lives in a very tangible way. But how does that sit with you? How do you sort of process it as a person?
I I don't think I internalize it, whether it's my
Yeah.
personality or my occupational therapy experience or a combination
Mm,
of both. Um, I I don't really like take that home with me, but
yeah.
I used to take some occupational therapy things home with me and like really mull over it, mull over a really uh not good situation overnight. But I think nowadays I I tend to think like, oh, I wish the world was a better place. Or why isn't the world a better place? Or how did it become like this? But I I don't I don't hold on to like the individual story too much. I think
That makes
that's
a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing and a bad thing. I think it's a good thing because I I don't want to be carrying the burdens of many, many, many people, but I think
Yeah.
it's also could be seen as like a weakness for lack of a better word because maybe then it's
Hmm.
harder to sympathize with the person.
Hmm. I see what you're saying, but I guess given the work that you do, I think you do sympathize and empathize with them, right? Because I'm sort of thinking about with your medical professional, it's sort of like a doctor or to your point, an occupational therapist, like you can't get too attached because then you have to like do something about it and then you carry it to the next person. And I really appreciate you sharing that because it's got to be hard. And the fact that you figured out a way to not let it get too tangled so that you can keep going. Because it's easy to get burnt out when you work in spaces that there is a lot of personal cognitive load and it like sort of weighs you down. And the fact that you're able to process it in this way, I think it's actually a good thing because it doesn't sort of paralyze you in my, you know what I mean? You see what I'm trying to get at? I think there's a lot to be said about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to dig a little bit more in the way you work. So first at FreeWorld, just one more question around that is, what is something that you've learned in the last year that has really stood out to you um, working with FreeWorld, whether it is your team or whether it is the work that you all do and who you do it with?
Mm, I think one le one theme of something that I've learned, that was the question, right? Something that I've learned. Oh,
Yeah. What have you learned about like working in this space or with this team that you really carried with you and you're looking back because, it's almost the end of the year. That's really stuck out to you in the past year.
mm. I think I've been working on communicating with the team or keeping keeping stakeholders involved at the right times. I think that's maybe there are some lessons I've learned about that over this year, but also it's still something that I'm continually working on because I think we all know that, keeping your stakeholders involved is important, but I think there's been such a variety of like stakeholder groups in the projects that I've worked on this year. Like some of them have been one on one more or less, and all of a sudden we had one that was much larger. but
Mm.
I don't know. I guess 5 or more. I'm not describing this well, but
Now I see what you're saying. Yeah, so in working with this team, something that you really have come to terms with is like in how you work. That seems to have evolved, and that you're starting to sort of form a process around stakeholders and getting feedback and all of that.
mhm,
So I totally feel that. What about what about in the creative world, right? I guess somebody who looks at constantly learning, and you're also like always looking to grow. I mean, that's frankly how you and I got together, right? And to like sort of talk about like, hey, tell me about how I work and that sort of thing. So in your creative process, what is something that you feel really good about this year? What's something that you have learned, not just in your day to day, like the stakeholder management, but for the work that you do itself as a designer?
mhm. Well, this year I I had the opportunity to pair with another mentor. You're one of my mentors. Another mentor to work on design strategy, which I had felt at, I guess I had identified at toward the end of last year as an area of potential growth that would help me be a better UX designer team of one for FreeWorld. So that's definitely something that I've learned a lot about this year, and it's been a really fun experience. And um,
Nice.
it was exciting to share some early deliverables with the team and receive positive feedback about it.
That's awesome. I really do recognize you as someone who's always working to build their knowledge, as I was just saying. So, in the vein of working with mentors and growing your knowledge as a designer, what about in tech and design? Are there trends right now that you're excited about?
I think that's one area of learning and growth that I'm less proactive about, actually. But I I have thought about it a little bit. I think AI is the big one that everybody is talking about
Yeah,
all
for
the
sure.
time, and it's definitely like making its way into my world at Free World as well. So I I wouldn't say that I'm super duper excited about it, but I am interested in learning more about it because it does seem helpful. So
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
mhm,
Okay. Guess I'm going to switch gears a little bit. When I ask you to describe your personal identity, how might you describe it?
my personal identity, I would say I'm a my go-to response is that I'm a quiet Asian girl.
Look at that. As a your words, not mine. As a quiet Asian girl, how has this identity shaped the way you work as well as the way you show up at work? Has it had impact?
the way that I work and the way that I show up at work, correct?
Hmm. Yeah.
I When I'm asked this question, I I think that I just largely accept that that is who I am, or at least who
Mhm.
I not even necessarily who I am, but who I how I come across.
Mm.
And I like I said, I just accept it and I move on with business as usual. Like I proceed how I feel is necessary, or I proceed with my process. I don't think there's I've never I rarely actively take any action to specifically try and like break down whatever initial thoughts people might have when they encounter a quiet Asian girl. I
Hmm.
just I just do my work and hope
Yeah.
that it shows for itself.
Yeah. And good for you. I feel like what I'm deducing from that and what I love from that is that you've got this quiet confidence that you're comfortable in who you are, you're comfortable in your skin, and you go about business as usual. But all that said, and we do live in a society that's frankly designed for introverts by introvert, by extroverts for extroversion, right? There absolutely is space for introverts. I very much identify on that spectrum as well. But when you think about defining yourself as a quiet Asian girl, and again, I love that you feel so comfortable in it. Do you think it's had an effect on how you live life? Like, has it shown up for you in life in any way, or sort of defined the choices you make, that sort of thing?
I'm sure that it has affected the way that I live my life. There's no way that it wouldn't have. I I think along with part of what's underlying in the quiet Asian girl is that I think about things a lot. So I tend to absorb and then mull over it and then speak up when I have something to say or when I'm ready to share. So I'm sure that impacts how I navigate my work and my life because if you think about conversations either one or on one or in groups or meetings, they're pretty they're pretty like back and forth, fast paced, right? So I
Yeah,
think that definitely has an impact.
like that makes sense. And it's I think especially in this remote world that we all live in, right? It's so easy to larger zooms, right? And fewer people just fill up all the space, and it's yeah, I hear you. Um, when you think about representation, and when you think about the larger design community, what does it mean to you when you see representation of race, of gender, identity, including I'm a quiet person in the industry?
I don't I think it makes me feel glad that other people have made it too.
Does it
Um,
give you hope?
yes,
Tell me
yes.
more.
I I feel like I have the benefit of being what we call like the model minority. So I think a lot of the times I don't even think about uh, I don't even think about like myself as representing like Asian females. I know that I do, but
Hmm.
it doesn't immediately come to mind. So I think even I feel hopeful when I see people who are who don't look like me and also also aren't, the majority representation.
Yeah. So just hearing back and digesting, it's a good feeling when any kind of minority is represented, especially in positions of power, because it gives you hope to think about like, well, there's more space than just, to be blunt, white people. And yeah, that makes a lot. That I really hear that. What about you were talking? I found that thread that we were starting to pick up about introversion super interesting, and it's just on a super nerd note. It's I'm always interested in reading about the power of introversion, of introverts, and it's like sort of this quiet. It's like this ability to be still that a lot of people do have, and I think especially with a craft like ours, it's really important to absorb and consider and then come back. When you see introverts in sort of like higher up in the design industry and all of that, tell me about your reflections on that.
When I see introverts higher up in the design industry,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, how
you
does
mean?
that make you feel like, and what do you take away from that? Like, you know, yeah, what comes out from that for you?
I think I do feel I think on one side I feel hopeful that it's possible and also as sort of a sense of like you go girl or boy. Um, and I kind of feel like yes, they're seeing and recognizing our strength
Yeah,
because
yeah,
yeah, you're right. I I don't read a ton about it, but I also have I agree with the powers of introversion. Or I agree that there are strengths to it.
yeah, for sure. If you're willing, you talked a little bit about the idea of a model minority. Can you talk to me a little bit more about where you were going with that thought?
Mm-hmm. I I was thinking about how on paper I'm a minority because I'm Asian female. But I I think that that negatively impacts me much less than many other minorities, because there's this like there's this stereotype that we work hard and we generally I we're just generally seeming to be like less differently scrutinized, not less, differently scrutinized, um,
Yeah,
for what we are.
yeah. No, I see what you're saying. What's interesting to me in that is that on a very real level, I hear you, right? And to feel like, well, I'm not as threatening to them, to be, yeah, a little bit less, to be a little bit more blunt about it. But at the same time, the fact that it is something that you consider and it is something that you're aware of, it is a weight to carry and something that you think about that many other people don't. And I appreciate that, you're sort of like, keep calm and carry on. Yes, this is a fact, but I'm going to keep going. That really speaks to your personal strength and what you hold day to day and not and don't let it come to you. Because not only do you have all of these degrees, like you've got an advanced degree and you'd have all of this experience, and then during one of the most difficult times when a lot of us were unraveling, you made a whole career change and took the time to learn about it, all while knowing this. I just think it speaks to your personal strength as a person. So shout out to you on that.
It's
all of that
the internal locus of control. Have you heard of that?
A little bit, but tell me more.
I don't know a lot more, but to put very simply, like if you have an internal locus of control, you believe that like you focus on the factors like that you yourself can have an impact on to make things happen, or like if something bad happens, you don't feel like, oh, the world is out to get me. You think, oh, what can I do to make this better? I'm probably butchering this completely if you were to read about it, but essentially that just focusing on what you have control over, that would be internally, rather than what you don't, which is everything else around you.
That's beautiful. I appreciate you breaking that down for me. Last question on this thread. In your opinion, what does it mean to be truly diverse and inclusive as an industry?
As an industry, I think maybe similar to just in general, diverse and inclusive would look like having representation from people of all ages, gender, race, experience, education, or every demographic you can think of.
So, Priscilla, a lot of what we've been talking about is just inspiration and what you draw from the world around you. What is something in your day to day that really inspires you?
I think the people that I work with and the group that I get to work with inspires me every day. FreeWorld has intentionally created a very diverse workplace, and we have people from different backgrounds. Maybe we don't have the biggest age range, but we have approximately half of our team members have been incarcerated or somehow impacted by the criminal justice system. That makes FreeWorld really unique in, being able to relate with the people that we serve, but also brings a lot of diverse experiences to the team. Whenever it's the most diverse group I've ever worked with, really. Whenever we have our full team meetings, I just like look at the Zoom box and all of the squares inside of it, and there's such a big range. And I think that's such a privilege and a luxury and an inspiration.
I love that, because you're right, it's not that common, and tech is definitely not as diverse. And I really love that you work at a place that is not only trying to solve a difficult problem, but includes people who've like been there and have lived through that difficult part. So we're almost to the end of this, and I appreciate learning so much about you. But just one or two more questions. The first of the one of the two last ones is that when I talked to you about personal identity, the first thing that came up with you was a quiet Asian girl. So is there a piece of advice that you feel important to share with other quiet Asian girls trying to enter the world of UX and trying to make it here?
Big piece of advice would be to, whatever it takes for you to get there, find a way to be confident in yourself, even, I want to say even if you don't believe it, but I might want to take that back. I think find a way to feel confident in yourself and who you are. Because if you can do that, then you can better overcome like whatever what is the word? Impressions people have of you.
That's
Well,
beautiful.
you can't overcome it per se, but it will
Yeah.
help.
Yeah, sort of like find what works for you in a sense, right? And make it work for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate that you acknowledge that sometimes that's hard to do, but it is possible, is what I'm taking away from it. When sort of my theme for this whole year has been, I've been talking to a lot of people about, making space. And even with this election, and thinking about how some people have voted and how some people have come from certain backgrounds and don't want to make space for more people with those backgrounds. A lot of that sums down to me as this, which is you have to hold the door open for more people, for future generations, for more people like you, for more people who do the work like you. So when I talk to you about holding the door for future designers and future minorities, what comes up for you?
I think I've had an opportunity at FreeWorld to take on a student project through students with students at UC Berkeley. So I think about that and maybe more opportunities to do things like that. I know the student projects might not always turn out well for one side or the other, but I had a great experience that time, and I learned a lot from the students, seeing how they work and their process, and seeing like new ideas that come from fresh eyes. I really appreciated having that opportunity because that's something that I didn't get to do in occupational therapy, even though it's common in occupational therapy because doing like what we call field work, which is essentially an internship, is part of your education.
Priscilla, I really appreciate the last 50 or so minutes you spent with me. Thank you for all of the gems that you've provided, whether it's like how to present yourself or whether it's how to keep going even when it feels difficult. Really appreciate you as a thoughtful creative. So thank you. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, Miriam. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the UX Ladder, Conversations Beyond Pixels, created by Mariam Khan, music by Ben Ewing.